Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Beyond Diligence, AI-based contract analytics for compliance, post-merger integration, investment intelligence, and telecommunications. My name is Audrey Dotson, and I'm the marketing manager for eBrevia. Before we get started, I wanted to go over a few webinar logistics, even though I'm sure at this point in the year, most of you are pros at digital events. First, everyone will remain on mute for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat and we'll be collecting them for Q&A at the end. We've reserved about 10 to 15 minutes to answer as many as we can. If you have any other needs, please also use the chat to let us know. We won't be using slides for this discussion, but I do have a couple that contain contact details and a few key takeaways that we'll send to you in a few days. The recording will also be available to watch in a few days, and you'll get that as well. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the discussion, Ned Gannon. Ned is the president and co-founder of eBrevia, a DFIN company and a leading provider of AI-powered contract analytics software that helps corporations, law firms, and organizations reduce document review time by 30 to 90%. And with that, I'll now turn it over to you, Ned.
Great, thank you so much, Audrey, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today. I think we have a really exciting panel with a lot of expertise here. So we'll jump right in. I'll start by introducing folks by name and then give people an opportunity to tell us a little bit about their backgrounds and their current focus. So I'm excited to say we have Kelsey Chase here today. He's the president and founder of Aumni. We also have Tyler Marion, who's the managing director at Duff Phelps. And then on the next slide, you'll see we have Mike Francis, who's the president of MD7. If you could advance the slide, please. And Jared Williams, who's the director of MD7. And then finally, I'm really pleased that we have David Weinman joining us as well. He's a product manager at Baker McKenzie. So with that, let's jump right in. And maybe Mike, you could start off by telling us a little bit about your background and your current focus at MD7.
Sure, thanks, Ned. Happy to be here. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon to those who are in Europe. MD7 is a mobile infrastructure consultancy. What we do is work with the major wireless carriers on a range of things related to their networks. One of the big areas that we work in, which we'll talk about more as the session goes through, is their wireless leases. These networks, the average network in the US probably has 60 or 70,000 sites and leases associated with those, and managing those leases is a real challenge for the operators. My background is very quickly, I was a nuclear submarine officer a long time ago. Then I was a lawyer at a big firm for about 12 years, and then joined MD7 as one of the founders of the company, and just basically from the startup period all the way until where we are today. And we do a whole range of things. We do entitlement work related to these sites in the US and in Europe. We do a lot of lease renegotiations, tens of thousands of them a year across the US and Europe. So an AI solution has become kind of critical to our business as we move forward in providing a lot of these services, which we'll talk about.
Great, thanks for the background and obviously overview of MD7 as well. And Jared, would you mind sharing a little bit about your role at MD7?
I'm happy to, Ned. Again, like Mike said, really happy to be here talking with everyone. So Mike did a great job of covering everything we do at MD7, or most of it, so I don't need to rehash that. I specifically oversee a lot of our strategic initiatives, and the implementation of emerging technologies has become an essential part of that. So looking at these machine learning and artificial intelligence platforms that help with a lot of our audit work and things like that is crucial. As Mike said, there are 60,000 leases per operator here in the US, and obviously those numbers are growing around the world as networks continue to develop. And so we on average probably look at close to 500,000 documents a year internally, whether it's through the lease negotiations that Mike mentioned or audit projects, data collection, things like that. So this solution has been a great tool for us moving forward, and we're excited to join everyone here today to talk a little bit about it.
Great, thank you. And David, could you share a bit about your current role at Baker McKenzie?
Sure. Thanks, Ned. I'm the product manager for legal technology innovation at Baker's. And I originally qualified as a lawyer, but I didn't want to practice once I had done so. So I ended up moving into technology. And my main role is to sit between the lawyers, our fee earners, our clients, and the sort of allied disciplines of project management, business development, that kind of thing on the one side, and then our engineers, our technology specialists, our developers, and our technology vendors on the other, and make sure that projects, initiatives, innovation ideas are being planned out and deployed successfully.
Gotcha, thank you. Interesting vantage point to have for sure. And Tyler, could you share a bit about your role and really the focus of Duff Phelps?
Yeah, thank you, Ned. So Tyler Marion with Duff Phelps, based out of Seattle, Washington. Duff Phelps is a global consultant firm. We have about 85 service lines, 4,000 people across the world. Our speciality is in risk and also in valuation. So we are a kind of financial services firm. My speciality, I head up the global data governance group with a focus on integration for post-merger and post-acquisition. So I'm leveraging my background, which is in law, and like David, I practiced for several years as Associate General Counsel, and then felt like law was for the birds, so got more into a consulting role.
Very good, very good. And then last but not least, Kelsey, would love to have you share a little bit about your focus and what I think is a very exciting company.
Yeah, thanks, Ned. So hello, everyone. Kelsey Chase, one of the co-founders of Aumni, and we are a data analytics platform for venture capital. And what we have done is designed really an analytical database and engine that focuses on the underlying financing agreements sitting behind all sorts of private capital investments. So currently working with the top Silicon Valley venture capital firms, many corporate venture firms, family offices, and helping them analyze and keep track of the hundreds of legal, financial, and economic data points underlying their legal agreements. My background, actually, it's good to hear Mike's story, and Ned, I certainly know yours as well, but more in the non-traditional legal career path. I started my career at Wilson Sonsini, focused on startup and venture capital work, and then ultimately ended up at DLA Piper for a few years, continuing to do venture capital and startup representation and transactions. So really excited to dive in today, and thanks for having me.
Great, great. Well, thanks so much for the introductions, everybody. So as folks know, the focus of this webinar is on use cases for contract analytics beyond what most people often think about contract analytics for, which is due diligence and M&A. And I think this is really a diverse set of perspectives. So I'm excited to get into it. So Mike, I'd love just to hear a little bit more about the use case that MD7 has for the contract analytics software.
Yeah, we've used it for a number of different projects. The very first project we used was a lease accounting project. You may know that lease accounting rules changed a couple years ago for public companies. So the wireless operators needed to look at their leases. I think we looked at, I don't know, 15 or 20,000 leases to determine what their new classification would be if it would change as a result of the accounting rules changes. So that was the first project that we worked on. We've used it for merger integration. We just finished working on a big project for the T-Mobile acquisition of Sprint. We looked at a whole range of different kinds of contracts that they had, comparing what T-Mobile had to what Sprint had to see, which of those contracts they would keep, which they would be able to, get rid of, and when they'd be able to get rid of them, that sort of thing. Just a massive project. So, 4 or 5 different contracts types, like their B2B contracts, they have roaming agreements, just a whole range of those kinds of things. We've also used it for what I would call complex contract management. So the operators have these master lease agreements. They might cover 10 or 15,000 sites. They're super complicated agreements. They're, 80 to 100 page agreements, but then they're amended, multiple times. They last 30 years plus, these contracts, and the provisions are quite complex. So we basically put the contracts into the eBrevia system, and we manage the contracts from that, from that platform. So when the changes come in, we're modifying them, but we're also using it to actually, when we have to reference it for a particular question that comes up as a result of the relationship, and they're always coming up. It's kind of a constant process. Instead of having to go through, a 80-page document and then 5 amendments that are maybe equally long or maybe a little shorter, but still very long, and just go into the system and find those contracts. Then lastly, we use it for, it's just really the primary use for us is to do actual contract management. And the use case for the wireless operators is somewhat unique in the sense that they'll have, the average US operator probably has somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 leases. They're some of the biggest leaseholders in the country. And those contracts, because they're related to sites in which the equipment is being changed on the site constantly, really every 1 to 2 years, the agreements are constantly being amended. And so they have and these are projects that we do for them, they have to take 10 or 12 or 15,000 of these every year and input new data related to the to their abstractions. And so what we do is we use we call the system contract analyzer, the whole system, but the eBrevia, to do that ongoing abstracting. And so we use it basically as an ongoing contract management tool, or a piece of the puzzle, to be able to abstract and allow them to keep up with their data all the time. The rents are changing, the rights are changing, the terms are changing, lease term is changing, basically every couple of years. So very different from commercial leasing, just because of how often they change and how many of them there are for one tenant, essentially.
Interesting. And I know it's always, really excited on our end where we're seeing the software used maybe in a vertical that we don't have a lot of domain expertise in, but it's been great to see MD7 adopt the system, train it in very specific concepts related to your use case, and really build it out from there. So thanks for sharing the background on that.
Sure.
So maybe I'll turn it over to David to learn a little bit more about your use cases at Baker McKenzie. Obviously, it's a huge global law firm, so lots of different types of opportunities, but would love to hear a little bit more about some of the areas you've seen the software be effective.
Thanks, Ned. Yeah. So we're spread out kind of both in terms of practice groups and in terms of geography. So I think one of the interesting use cases for eBrevia that we caught on to fairly quickly is using it to give us insight into the structure of the data and the nature of the documents very quickly. So if we have access to, a client provides us a large data set or access to a data room, the client may not well know exactly what's there, exactly what's to be expected. It's hard for, I think, a law firm that doesn't have access to this type of technology and doesn't have expertise in it to be able to quickly assess and resource appropriately. So by running kind of whatever we have through eBrevia, we very quickly get a sense of, well, not just things like the languages and the contract types, but very quickly, I think we can get a sense of the topography of the documents. Where are the red flags? Where are the concerns? How did that line up with what we expected? What kind of expertise do we need to pull in? What do we need to focus on more quickly? So it allows us to, of course, in addition to what Mike was saying. I think it really allows us to very quickly project manage and deploy the expertise from the human reviewers, from the lawyers, in a much more focused, targeted, prioritized way. And that's kind of spread out across the practice groups, across the geographical regions. Of course, then the nice thing, of course, is that using the kind of the other features, not just the AI component, but the other analytics features and the other project management features, there's a consistency across the different practice groups. There's a consistency of output. There's a consistency of review, which I think is very helpful when we're doing multi-practice group or multinational reviews.
Interesting. And I think, one of the themes you mentioned there, and Tyler and I have talked about this at other times as well, is really the software as a way to augment the human expertise. So sometimes we get the question, oh, does eBrevia replace attorneys? And the answer is no, but it helps them to function more accurately and efficiently. So thanks for sharing that. Tyler, maybe picking up on that point, could you tell us a little bit about what you focus on at Duff Phelps with respect to eBrevia? Oh, I think it looks like you're on mute, Tyler.
Sorry, Ned.
Perfect.
So Duff Phelps is the largest valuation firm in the world. We did about 12,000 deals last year. And so in that capacity, I run the global data governance group, which helps with the integration aspects of some of these deals to the extent that the clients want it. And so what we're leveraging eBrevia to do is both on the front end of the deal and on the back end of the deal. So the front end of the deal might help our valuation people, which are all finance-based, do fair market value assessments, or others to help with kind of getting over those hurdles or through those gates for acquisition. And then after that, we're then leveraging eBrevia to help with the integration when it comes to kind of how the contracts are colliding, how we make sure that the acquisition goes through with consents and terminations and assignments, et cetera. And then also figuring out where there are synergies with the contractual structure of the two entities or three entities or how many are colliding at that moment. So we're leveraging the system, and to your point earlier, it's not replacing anybody, it's just making us move faster or helping us move faster.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and definitely consistent with what we hear quite a bit. So Kelsey, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know you've got a pretty innovative use case for eBrevia and kind of how it fits into your current processes.
Yeah, thanks, Ned. I will take the opportunity to answer your question about AI replacing human lawyers with an emphatic no, at least not in the foreseeable future. And I think it's interesting. You've got a multitude of stakeholders here, and many of them are picking up on use cases and reasons why they are leaning into technology, and it's speed, efficiency, allowing the people doing the review to operate a lot more quickly. And for us, speed and efficiency is definitely a significant value proposition, but the most important one actually for our businesses is accuracy. So our database is relied on by hundreds of investors, many general counsel, financial professionals, folks that work at venture capital, private equity, corporate venture funds. And the need to rely on a database, our platform, which is a web-based application, and the underlying data that's pushed through that application that they have access to is extremely high. They're making investment decisions, conducting financial reporting. And so for us, the reason why we've decided to adopt technology and why we are leveraging and using eBrevia for components of that is to help us with the accurate extraction and review of terms. So I think in general, the types of agreements that we analyze may not be quite at the volume or scale of someone like MD7, but we are analyzing tens of thousands of private financing agreements. And for folks that have practiced in the corporate transactional space, I mean, those agreements can take all sorts of different flavors and structures. So that said, the venture industry does have a fairly standardized approach to financing transactions. So for Aumni, we are looking really our approach, just being an iterative, agile startup company, is at a high level, we're trying to identify the areas of document review, analysis, and extraction that, from our perspective, humans just aren't great at, and computers actually tend to be pretty good at. And so so far, there's a pretty elegant way that humans are working alongside the technology. And for us, we're trying to optimize the components of legal agreements where computers are just very good at extracting data accurately. And we do leave some of the bespoke review and analysis to human lawyers at our company that are required to step in. And one of the realities of especially the private transactional space is you run into nonsensical formulations of contracts and language, and that does frankly require an expert to come in and review and provide insight and guidance.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think underscoring the accuracy piece is important. I know when we had initially started eBrevia, we really saw it more as an efficiency play, but folks very quickly said, and this was often in the diligence context, where you'd have junior attorneys up at 2 in the morning going through complex documents, easy for things to fall through the cracks, and I unfortunately can vouch for that even based on my own legal experience, having missed a thing or two when I was practicing. Yeah, and I think one interesting piece of that is when we think about accuracy, it's often even not so much the human against the machine, but really that attorney using the software against the attorney without the software, and helping to identify some things that may have otherwise fallen through the cracks. So thanks for sharing that. So one thing I'd be curious about, sometimes when there's large entities looking to adopt contract analytics technology, you'll get it in the door, maybe there's a pilot, et cetera. But I think one thing that's important is, once a vendor's been selected, is really how do you drive that adoption through the organization? What does the implementation look like? So Jared, I know this is something you've been involved in a bit at MD7, and would love to hear your perspective on what's successful in helping to drive that adoption and what the implementation looks like, and then also any lessons that may have been learned through the process.
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting process. We work with these major wireless operators globally who, as we've discussed, manage 70 to 100,000 leases, and they traditionally have done it a very archaic way, right? The document comes in, some, analyst or junior lawyer or somebody looks at it, pulls out 3 or 4 pieces of information, and then, off it goes into some repository. And, in the old day, it went into a box in a filing room somewhere, and, Iron Mountain or someone would have, a warehouse full of documents that no one ever looked at again. And so, as we started to evaluate this and leverage the experience that we have, what we realized is that all of these documents contain data. That's really what they are, right? They're just stacks and stacks and stacks of data. And so for our use case, when we look at asset management, there's no better way to empower better asset management of these multi-billion-dollar networks than leveraging that data that's contained in all of these documents. So, as we've gone in to sell to these major operators, certainly we sell the accuracy, we sell the data integrity, the completeness, right? Those things are obviously essential if you're going to manage these networks and make sure that things get paid and sites get built and upgraded and all of that. But we also have sold them on, leveraging all of that data to better run their business, which I think is an avenue that, a lot of companies don't think about. They have, whatever their core focus is, and so they become very myopic in that regard. And what we have to do is sort of broaden their horizon and get them to focus on a bit of a bigger picture and understand that there's a lot more going on there that they can utilize to empower their business. So on top of that, certainly the efficiency play is important, right? I also have, I didn't mention it at the start, but I have a legal background as well. So we all seem to have moved on to greener pastures. But I certainly echo the fact that it doesn't get rid of lawyers. That's absolutely true. But it definitely alters the volume of lawyers that you might need, especially at scale. And so certainly a lot of our customers are looking at that efficiency play. They're constantly looking to save money, avoid cost in the future for various aspects of their business. And so, having a platform like this that combines the accuracy and efficiency, I think it has been very good for us in terms of selling into the operators. From an implement, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
No, please go ahead. I don't mean, go ahead.
Yeah, just to answer the second part of your question about the actual implementation, it's interesting because you sort of have to get them to think a bit differently about managing all of these documents and all of this data moving forward. So a lot of times they have very ingrained processes that are defined that way because of SOX compliance or something like that. And so there are all these controls and there's all these bigger things that you're battling. And additionally, a lot of times when you sell into these bigger organizations, one of the things you're fighting is that they're trying to select a one-size system that will fit the entire organization. And so it's not always the case, as I'm sure you and the others on the panel can attest to, that one specific platform is going to meet the needs of the entire business. Each vertical in a major organization like that is different. And so what we've tried to do is, with eBrevia, what we did was identify the platform, the capability, and the technology that was going to best suit our core business and the core business of our customers in those specific verticals that we operate in. Right? We don't operate in customer service. So when evaluating what system was going to be most effective, we didn't really need to address what customer service was thinking of. So I think we can eventually touch on it in some key takeaways later, but I think from an implementation standpoint, understanding that you're looking for a system that's going to best fit the needs of your part of the organization is very important.
Yeah, I think that's really a key concept to highlight for sure. And some of the other interesting takeaways from your comments are engaging not only having the software add value within your organization, but also thinking about how it's adding value for your clients as well. I know one of the things we've really tried to focus on at eBrevia is incorporating features to help facilitate interactions between the service provider and then the end client, which is usually a corporate or maybe a financial institution. So thanks, definitely thanks for sharing that perspective. David, I'd be curious to kind of hear your take on this issue. Obviously, Baker McKenzie is a little bit of a different type of organization, and maybe you've encountered different challenges or seen different opportunities along the way with respect to driving adoption and then implementation more generally.
Sure. And you're right. I think so. Given the nature of our clients tends to be quite broad, given the nature of our practices tend to be quite broad, and then we have cultural differences as well. So I think adoption. I think there's two axes to think about. The one axis is kind of how do we appeal to the type of person, the type of stakeholder that we're trying to get to buy in to this type of technology and to eBrevia specifically. On the one hand, we have colleagues and clients that are very, very focused on, as we say, things like the efficiency, things like the accuracy, things that we can quantify. I think others are much more interested in this idea of the art of the possible. What can we do if we sort of spread out and start thinking in different ways about how we leverage this technology? And I suppose that kind of then we think about the adoption for on the kind of the other axis, this idea of what kind of projects or what kind of use cases we're looking at for eBrevia. So some will be contract analytics, and as we sort of move kind of across the axis into sort of the slightly more unusual or different use cases. I mean, we have things where we want to start leveraging the custom training within eBrevia. Maybe that's contemplating a new service line that wouldn't necessarily be possible. Maybe it's expanding our abilities in a given region or given language using the custom training. But that requires a different approach, I think, than sort of cold efficiency or cold statistics. Maybe it's communicating different use cases so that kind of colleagues and clients have some reassurance that this isn't the first rodeo that they're being used on. But I mean, I think to a broader point, and I think this is probably true for most of the industries for the speakers. I think that there's an understandable apprehension from lawyers and from colleagues in the various speakers' companies about making mistakes. And I think it's that uncertainty around artificial intelligence and around innovation that is a barrier to adoption. And so I think probably one of the best ways to get that buy-in is this idea of start small, start often, do lots of lessons learned, make sure that people, be it the clients, be it the colleagues, be it the stakeholders, are comfortable with the technology in a sort of relatively risk-free environment, so they can see what it can do. And I think we've talked a couple of times about this idea of the lawyers being augmented by the technology. But what I've noticed is there's still wild misconceptions about what the technology is capable of. Some people think it's going to do everything for them. Some people are incredibly pessimistic and think that the technology is, it won't help them at all. And of course, it's sort of closer to the former than the latter. But I think it's it's helping them to understand where the technology fits in. And I think really the way to do that is to give them experience in it and to do it in a relatively risk-free environment. And that's, I think, where certainly I've seen most success.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective to have. And I like your comments around utilizing the software in non-English languages as well. That's certainly been a focus for us, over the last year or so, and we've seen additional adoption. Interestingly, particularly in Japan, but also Germany, France, and are excited to continue to grow that. In fact, I think maybe MD7 has even used it in Germany. So let me shift a little bit to another question, and I'll ask Tyler this one. So I'm curious, what were the most important factors when you were considering different contract analytics vendors? And would love to hear, what stood out to you about eBrevia in your selection process.
Yeah, so we came to Duff with a focus that we were always going to have a technology play, and before I get into it, some kind of ripples or currents that I've picked up through a couple of the other presenters is that you have all this data. So, I came to Duff as an integration person, but it was more that I'm a data person. I'm helping my clients figure out what all this data can do for them. So my portfolio of people changed from lawyers and analysts to more data engineers. I have more data engineers on my team now than I have ever before because I need to help process everything that's coming in. And so in that vein, we knew that we were going to have a technology play. And so we have constantly been combing the landscape for who might have the best technology, what's my cost point, et cetera. And so we went through about 50 providers before we got to eBrevia. Not that I signed with them, I investigated them. And when we got to eBrevia, we really found a nice sweet spot. To the point made earlier, I don't need it to do everything because they can't do everything, but also those that say they can do everything can't. And they usually charge an arm and a leg for that can't. So I needed to find something that was just going to get me what I need, the most usable data for my data engineers and my analysts. And so we found that sweet spot with eBrevia. It's an accurate tool. It helps. It's very easy to use. We constantly can kind of season the pan or season the dish, so it helps us be more efficient in the newer clients that we pick up because we're doing very similar things. And so we've just really found a nice fit with you, Ned, and with eBrevia. And I think probably the most important thing, and something that I constantly bring up to Ned, is we knew these platforms, and we wanted to be part of the discussion. So when we were looking at eBrevia, you'll remember this, Ned, we actually flew to New York and met with your chief technology officer and yourself. And we said, listen, we've got all these ideas. We want to be part of the design, part of the solution to the extent that you'll let us. And you kind of opening those doors and allowing us to be part of the conversation really, really sealed the deal.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I will say, many of your suggestions have been incorporated into the product. They've resulted in some of our most popular features. And that is something we try to do with clients generally, is that we do build capacity into our roadmap to take into account client suggestions and really make sure what we're building is going to add value for our clients. So thanks for sharing that. I guess, Kelsey, from your perspective, what were you looking for when you started to evaluate contract analytics vendors as part of your process?
Sure. Yeah, and one of the gentlemen from MD7 hit a really important point for a fast-growing startup. We were, very much thinking about scale, and scale in the early days. You often hear, do things that don't scale, do them very well, and figure out where the opportunities to automate and make processes more efficient, and do them. So, in the early days, I mean, we were not analyzing the volume of contracts that really necessitated or required a more automated approach to it, leveraging a platform like eBrevia. But as we were thinking about our scale and growth, working with hundreds of potential stakeholders, we were actively thinking about solutions and really good partners to help us along that growth journey. And I would say from my legal background at Wilson Sonsini and DLA, as a user, I had seen a variety, I've seen demonstrations, a variety of different types of platforms, and so was generally aware of some of the options out there. But the nice thing about when we were conducting our search is I was able to bring in our chief technology officer and just give a brief moment to talk about him. He was an investment banker, so actually pursued a finance career and then found a knack for coding, and then is now very senior coding and software architect. But this is someone that understands finance and law, like actually really brings the finance and legal acumen to software development. And so I was fortunate enough to bring our CTO into the search and discovery process. And I think independent of my own conclusion that eBrevia was the right solution for Aumni to adopt, we really had it vetted from a technology standpoint and thinking about our own technology roadmap. And so there was just and I think where eBrevia scored extremely well was around just the ability to fit into a complex and ever evolving software platform and data analytics platform. So as much as it checked all of the boxes, I think from a legal services standpoint, it actually for us even scored really high on the kind of the technical chops and abilities of the platform, the advancement and just how much you all have built at eBrevia and how sophisticated the tool was.
Thanks for sharing that. And it's very exciting for us to be working with you. I know, as you said, you are growing quickly, and we love to grow with our clients. So thanks for sharing that perspective. And I think maybe we have time for one more question, and I'll ask it of you, Mike, before we open it up to the audience questions. And I think this is, I'd just like to maybe drill down a little bit more into where the system fits into your current review process. I think that, can vary based on type of entity, but it might be interesting for the audience to learn a little bit more about that for MD7 specifically.
Yeah, just a little bit of background. One of the reasons that we started searching for a solution like eBrevia is because we were doing these large abstract projects for the wireless operators. It's obviously a cost for them to be able to abstract those documents, and we started seeing some of that work shifting overseas to less expensive lawyers, frankly, in other countries, and we're starting to lose that work because the folks that we had doing it in the U.S., which I call baby lawyers, they're primarily lawyers who have passed the bar but not necessarily practiced or started practicing. But it's the United States. We're in California. You're not going to pay them the same wage that you might pay in some other countries. And so we were trying to find a solution that would help us compete essentially with the lower cost folks, overseas. And what we've seen from the system is that it's about, it takes about 80% of the work out of the process. And basically we use very experienced people to train the system on the key contract provisions that we're trying to extract. And so you're basically kind of getting the best of both worlds in the sense that the people who really know, I made this comment when we talked a little bit earlier, there are some of these contract provisions where literally a comma can change the way that you interpret a provision from an abstract perspective. And if you can take someone who's looked at thousands of these leases, who really understands those intricacies and can train the system using those examples, you're going to get a much more accurate result out of that abstract, then training up, again, what I call baby lawyers, young lawyers, who don't have a lot of experience. They're legally trained but don't have a lot of experience. You're going to get a better answer and a better result. And so then what you focus on, instead of that initial abstract, you focus on the QC, right? And we QC all the documents in the system. So, you have the actual document on one panel, and then you have what you've abstracted on the other side. And even the abstraction or the QC process is faster as a result of, having the actual document and the abstracted data essentially side by side. And so we can take about 80% of the work out of the process. The accuracy, we've talked about it, I think generally, the accuracy needs to be super high. I mean, they're making big decisions based on, the accuracy of this data. We have KPIs in our contracts. We've got to meet, certain accuracy requirements, or, we either have to redo it or, potentially don't get paid as much. And so you need to be super accurate with, what you have. And that, the review process of the work that's done by the machine, you can spend a little bit more time doing it because you're not paying someone to do the initial, abstract. And so the combination of it is much more consistently accurate because the machine is finding those complicated provisions that a younger lawyer may have difficulty making that distinction. And you have someone who you can pay a little bit more, who's more experienced, to do the QC, to make sure that the machine has gotten the answer, right, in those times. But because it's all in the system and already done, it's a very, very quick process. So the cost has gone, for the operators using these systems, has gone way down.
Yeah, that's interesting, and really a great way, I think, for folks to scale their domain expertise. I would say, yeah, and it's probably maybe 30 to 40% of our client base that's leveraging that bespoke self-training very heavily. I think other folks just rely on the pre-trained provisions, but certainly, when you're very vertical specific as you are, it's really really critical. I think the other thing that's interesting.
I just say that was a key, that the flexibility of the system from a training standpoint. I mean, you don't know exactly what you're doing when you get into it. It's very much of an iterative process, and the ability to, change what provisions you're looking for, change exactly how you categorize things. All of that was super easy to use in eBrevia. And a lot of the other systems that we looked at were just more difficult. It was just harder to get in there and come up with that customized training, because you don't know, again, what you want until you get into it. And it changes, for us, it would change 100 times. So if you don't have a flexible system, it just, takes forever to train the system. And then once we started training the system, we trained it on the most difficult provisions early on. Like I said, we were actually blown away by the accuracy of it. I mean, how quickly it could, how few examples we had to throw in there before it really started handling the complex provisions that we were dealing with.
Oh, that's great. And I think, when some folks hear training, they think, oh, we need our data scientists to get in there and train it. And your point underscores that no, that's not the case. It's really the domain experts. It's built into the user interface. And we have seen many clients that almost just train it as part of their normal review at times. So they're leveraging some provisions and then training it on others along the way.
Right, and we did that. I mean, there's some provision, like an assignment provision is an assignment provision is an assignment provision, so we would use some that you guys had already trained up, and then others that we specifically did because, the contract has very specific language related to, what we're dealing with.
Yeah,
so absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we're starting to, let's see, we've got about 12 minutes left or so, and I have seen some questions come in from the audience. So let me just pull up some of those, and we can field them. So actually, this is a question for David, and the question is, can you give an example of the type of red flags that eBrevia reveals as part of the review?
It's a good question, and I think it will depend on each. on the nature of each project. But I think a couple of points flow out of that. I suppose the first one is the kind of some of the big value for us in eBrevia is allowing the lawyers to spend more time actually conducting the analysis. So if eBrevia is reporting back on, for an example, an assignment clause or a change of control clause or something like that, that may be problematic, the lawyer is then able to spend more time to understand it properly. Mike, for example, mentioned, there may be a comma that changes the meaning, and it means then that the division of labor allows us to catch those red flags potentially much earlier, and also to understand their implications much more deeply. And then on top of that, as Mike and Ned mentioned, if the red flag that we're looking for is potentially something fairly bespoke to the project, perhaps it's something in a particular way of from one of the parties has drafted the contract, we may then decide to take the time to custom train it. Kind of initially as a first batch of training, and then as we see other things that we might want to flag or might want to look at in more detail, we add those into the mix as well. So I'm sorry that it's an it depends answer, which is kind of
the typical lawyer answer. Sure.
Never the most popular answer, but it does depend. But what I think the important part is that everything that eBrevia catches, and I won't go back over the kind of the accuracy points because I think they've been made and they've been made well. But everything that eBrevia catches is something that our lawyers don't have to, and it's something then that we can instead spend that time properly thinking about, rather than sort of struggling to copy into an Excel or making sure that we've actually kind of gone through and seen it properly.
Sure. That's great. And then another.
I have something.
Oh yeah, please.
To add,
yeah.
Ned.
Yes,
That's right.
definitely.
Yeah. So part of what we do for integration is to help our clients understand what the privacy concerns might be for newly acquired entities. So what we have is a pre-programmed package with our clients that are serial acquirers to say, these are the addenda that we need to have to make sure that we are buttoned up when it comes to our risk profile for all new vendors that have been acquired. And so it's helping our teams move through these contracts with great speed to say, here are the types of addenda that it might be missing, so that we can build a package to send out to those vendors to say, you need to button this up or we will drop you as a vendor, et cetera. So it's helping kind of raise those red flags very, very early on in the acquisition, or the integration, I should say, so that they're kind of ready at day one, maybe day 5, but very quickly. So it's not a surprise if there's a leak or if there's some kind of water coming in through the cracks. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no,
and eBrevia helps us identify that. Yeah.
That's a good point. Okay, so another question here. Has eBrevia helped in generating business with your own clients? So is there an opportunity to kind of position contract analytics as a way to garner more business, maybe by showing you're more efficient or more accurate? And I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit there. So why don't I turn that over to Jared? We'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Mike mentioned 2 key engagements that we've done over the last 18 months. One was the Sprint T-Mobile merger, and we provided a lot of consulting and integration planning and stuff like that on the side. But because we had this contract analytics capability through eBrevia, we were able to, to tie into the clean room and do a lot of analysis for a lot of other business verticals that we might not otherwise, have worked with. So when we were looking at roaming and B2B and IoT and all these other document types, we were able to sell into a new section of the business that we had not interacted with in the past. Additionally, with AT&T on the implementation of ASC 842, it was a huge factor for us having eBrevia on our side, when we went to sell in for that as well. So, it helps us, differentiate ourselves from the competition in this space. And what it also does, I think, is allow us to start competing in spaces where we otherwise might not have been competing before. So it allows us to change the perception of our business, at least in our industry, and to demonstrate to our clients that we're doing things differently. We're not just like everybody else, just like every other vendor coming in. We're taking new, more strategic, more technology-based approaches to what we bring to the table. So that's been very helpful as well for us from a selling standpoint. Yeah.
Great, great. And Kelsey, I'd love to hear your perspective on that as well. I mean, I would assume, traditionally, a lot of this review of these documents, these financing documents, has been manual. So curious to hear your perspective on how this helps improve your value proposition for clients.
Yeah, it's a great question, and still to this day is true. We have a very manual component to the document review and analysis, and I would say that I think the most valuable component of that actually it's being in the venture world. You kind of hear a lot of a spectrum of opinions on automation and contract review and analysis, but for us, I really go back to the accuracy point. And to maintain a level of accuracy for us does require the adoption of technology, but also requires human lawyers to be involved in the process. So for us, the manual component is actually a value added part of our sales pitch and value proposition. And I think keep in mind with us, we have really sophisticated users, general counsels at multi-billion-dollar venture firms, CFOs, general partners, folks that really understand law and finance and complex data sets. And so I think the folks that are the most sophisticated, closest to the data, they appreciate the value of being able to have a human involved in the process, involved in the QA and review, because I just go back to this point of reliance. In order for our customers to actually trust and rely on a cloud-based data set, they're going to need accuracy, and they're going to need a lot of credibility among the other customers we work with.
Gotcha. Makes a ton of sense. And it looks like another question's come in, and this one may actually be more for me. So happy to answer it. But the question's around legal liability if the software misses something. And I would just say, this kind of goes back to some of the earlier points in that when you think about accuracy, and that's one of the real, I think, value propositions for eBrevia, is it actually the use of the software with the attorney is helping to decrease the chances of something falling through the cracks. So ultimately, we never advise our clients to just run the software, take the results, and push them out to their own clients. But it really is very much an interactive process between the human and the machine. So the ultimate work product is the responsibility of the service provider. But I think that's often how we frame it to folks, and it does improve the accuracy overall. So I think that's one of the main benefits that Mike highlighted as well. And even, I remember very early on, we would even sometimes get, that relates a little bit more to kind of the legal terms and conditions, but we'd even sometimes get questions from an ethical standpoint of, can attorneys rely on this type of technology ethically? And what I would say there is, because using the software makes folks more accurate when going through these large data sets, I think the perspective is maybe more from an ethical perspective, it makes sense. You should be using the latest technology to decrease the chances of misses for clients. So interesting question. One we tended to get kind of a bit more in the past, but I think most folks are comfortable with the concepts now, similar to how you'd even rely on LexisNexis or Thomson Reuters when doing case law research. So let me see, there may be a couple other questions here. So a question related to blockchains. Blockchains are something eBrevia hasn't been used significantly in conjunction with. So unfortunately don't have much to offer on that. Very interesting space though. We're continuing to keep an eye on it as it relates to smart contracts, et cetera. But interesting question. And I think that looks like it's just about it for the audience questions. And I see we're right at the end here. So I guess before we close up, I'll just ask the group any final kind of quick takeaways or final thoughts anybody would like to share. Okay. Well, we've had a very robust discussion. Certainly, highly expert panel coming at this from a variety of different perspectives. So, very much appreciate everybody's time on the panel. I know it's an early morning, especially for some of the folks on the West Coast. So, thank you for participating. Thanks everybody for dialing in and listening to the webinar. We will send out some slides as well. MD7 was kind enough to put together some key takeaways, which unfortunately we didn't get a chance to run through specifically, but we will share those materials. And again, appreciate everybody's time this morning. Happy and safe holidays to everybody. Take care and thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ned, and thanks to all the speakers. It was really amazing having all of you together. And I have taken down notes for sure, and I'm sure the audience as well has taken down the notes from the session. Very entertaining and very, very amazing session full of knowledge. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And I'll be sharing all the materials later for the repost and the recording and everything. So yes, thank you so much for participating. It was really nice having you on board.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye.